p.m. Central Time, May the 23rd. And I am Leon Davis, and you're listening to the weekly podcast, Altitude Adjustment. It covers people, politics, and professions. I want to thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. A couple of announcements before we get started. First, Keisha will not be joining me this previous commitment. Hopefully she will. I look forward to having her back, and have really enjoyed having her on the podcast. Also, today I am trying a new form of interaction with you. So while I try to perfect this method, there may be a little delay in getting to your questions or comments, or there may be a struggle to even make sure I have seen it. So bear with me on that. I look forward to hearing from you. That's what makes the show what it is some feedback. So hopefully I will get that from you. And as I said, I look forward to hearing from you. There is a constant battle regarding the authority of governments in the country. And it's the federal government, state and local governments are always getting pushback because of people challenging their authority. The states have been issuing lockdowns, and that has brought about some specious arguments about government authority. Today's discussion is about examining some of those specious arguments in the episode titled Rights and the Constitution.
Welcome to Altitude Adjustment.
So, as I mentioned, I try to catch as much news from as many different sources as I possibly can. And I try to include, a variety and not just listen to the echo chamber of what I like. I try to expand the best way to know different things is to listen to different sources. And one of those sources is this week, I ran across a clip from Fox Morning Show, Fox and Friends. And there's a contributor on there, Andrew Napolitano. Now, Andrew Napolitano is the Fox legal contributor. He was an undergraduate of Princeton University, graduated Notre Dame School of Law. He was admitted into the New Jersey bar in 1975 and served as a New Jersey Superior Court judge. Now, the appellate jurisdiction is the power of a higher court to hear appeals from a lower court. The higher court can review decisions and change outcomes of the decisions of lower courts. So I'm going to play you a clip, and it has been edited it was not edited to change the context of what he's saying, but just get to some of the unique point bring about.
Republicans made it very clear that they don't believe a statewide approach is the right way to go in time, and they also don't believe that any restrictions are advisable at this time. Given that, it just doesn't make any sense to spend a lot of time doing something that we know isn't going to be successful.
All right, let's bring in Judge Andrew Napolitano to talk about this subject. He's the Fox News senior judicial analyst and host of Liberty File on Fox Nation. Good morning to you, Judge.
Good morning, Ainsley, Steve, and Brian.
So the Wisconsin Supreme Court said he was required to work with Republicans. He didn't consult the legislators, therefore it's null and void. Same thing happened in Oregon. The judge ruled restrictions infringed on religious freedoms after churches and parishioners sued the governor there, Kate Brown. Therefore, her restrictions were null and void. If you were the judge in these two cases, what would you do?
Well, I've been pretty clear about this, Ainsley, that all of these lockdown orders are without lawful authority. They're unconstitutional. They violate the Bill of Rights. They interfere with our freedom of religion, our freedom of travel, our right to privacy, our freedom of speech, our freedom of assembly. I could just go right down the line.
You know, Judge, so many governors had lockdown orders and executive orders as we were going up the COVID mountain, and, you know, tens of thousands of Americans were dying. And, you know, as the lockdowns continued now, a lot of people are saying, you know, we were very concerned about public safety at the time, but the question is, what sort of civil liberties did we give up and might never get back?
Well, we gave up a lot of civil liberties. We gave up, I hate to say we, because this is so against my grain, and I believe against yours and the people watching us now. The right to go to church, the right to go to temple, or right to assemble as a group.
Now, I understand about precautions, but they're destroying local businessmen and women.
Yes.
These governors are just too lazy to get out of their mansions and drive around or empower mayors to start working with these business owners to keep them alive. Weeks and days matter.
You are precisely right, Brian. Their job is not only to protect our safety, but to protect our rights. If they keep us safe but not free, they are not doing their jobs. They are violating their oath to uphold their own state constitutions, and they're violating their oath to uphold the federal constitution, because I think the crisis period is over.
Yeah.
People who want to take chances have the right, the constitutional right, to take a chance.
Okay, so I realize that I'm going up against Judge Napolitano, who has quite a bit more experience in legal matters than I do. So I do this with great humility, and there are issues that I take with some of the things that he mentioned. So let me start first by to the Constitution, because he said that they were violating people's rights. And one of the things that first jumps out at me when you read the Constitution is Thomas Jefferson's statement: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Life is first. So the government has two responsibilities, in my view. The government has two mandates, two responsibilities. That is all the government is there for. They are there to protect the people, and they're there to protect people's rights. Life has to be first. They have to protect people, because without the people, there is no need for rights. You can't have any rights of a dead person. So life has to be the first obligation. It is definitely the first obligation. And so I think what happens is, in this situation, there was an attempt to balance liberties with life. How do you protect someone's life without trampling some of their liberties? And there are numerous examples of that in our society where rights have been dismantled for the sake of liberty. Now, there was another quote by Benjamin Franklin. I had the quote, but I think I axed it, and I may go back and get it before the end of the before I end the podcast. So I'm not going to try to wing it off the top of my head, though I've mentioned it several times in my private life. So one of the things that Steve Ducey, and Steve Ducey was one of the people in the panel questioning the judge. One of the things that Steve Ducey said talked about our civil liberties being sacrificed that we may never get back. Our government, there are things that the government has to do in order to protect the people, and the question becomes, what can the government do in order to protect the people that in the society? So one of the things that they talked about in the clip was the right to go to church and freedom of religion. So the right to go to church. Now, in our society, there are people who are imprisoned, and they're imprisoned to protect people from their behavior. That is part of the reason that they're imprisoned. They're placed in a position where they cannot deny liberty and the pursuit of happiness from other people in society because they have broken rules. They may not get to go to church. So the right to go to church is not an absolute right. So most of the rights that are identified in the Constitution aren't absolute rights. There is always some level of compromise in providing those rights to our citizens. The judge also mentioned the right to assemble. So the right to assemble, to get together as a group and practice whatever you want to practice, that right has been trampled by police who, if several people are congregating on a particular corner and they may not be doing anything nefarious, they may not be doing anything that is untoward, they may not be impeding anyone else's ability to life, liberty, or the pursuit of their happiness, but they're allowed to ask those people to not congregate or not assemble in that particular time and place. That is a right that is trampled on, and it's supported by some of those same people who had difficulty with the governors issuing lockdowns. The freedom to travel was one of the items listed by the Judge Napolitano, the right to travel. And in this country, we actually have what's called a no-fly list. These are people who are not allowed to travel by airplane or may be impeded from crossing state lines or may be confined to a particular area for one reason or another. Those rights then are being denied those people for one reason or another to protect the liberty of the life and the liberty of other citizens. And how we apply those rules isn't arbitrary. It is supposedly well thought out, well planned, well put into a position where they're debated, and then we debate the potential consequences. How do we enforce those rights and privileges? And what are the consequences if you violate those sets of rules and regulations or liberties? And that's all done with the intent to ensure the safe and efficient implementation of our system of social order. So one of the things that Judge Napolitano pointed out was freedom of speech. And this one has obviously long been debated. It's the first article, and freedom of speech is not absolute. I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago called Yelling Fire Paradigm. You cannot go into a crowded theater or a crowded restaurant or a crowded building and yell fire if there's no fire. This is to protect people from creating a situation where they can be harmed by the reaction to your speech. Hate speech can be regulated. This is so free speech does not necessarily, freedom of speech does not necessarily mean absolute freedom of speech. And we can debate whether or not hate speech should be regulated, and we can debate whether yelling fire in a crowded venue should be regulated. And that's a part of what we do as a society in order to maintain safety and the liberty and the pursuit of happiness, so that everyone has an opportunity to participate in the society and perform without the lack of fear that they're going to be shut out of the opportunity to participate. So now the final part of the clip, really kind of, so I struggled with this quite a bit. and I go back and forth with it. And one of the things that Judge Napolitano said was, people have the constitutional right to take a chance. So I've said on many occasions, people have the right to go to jail. And what I mean by that is, we should not attempt to legislate every aspect of a person's behavior. We should not attempt to pass laws that are so restrictive that we have a law that governs every single behavioral habit of every human being within the borders of our country. But there are people who challenge even the most mundane or innocuous law, such as a reasonable person understands that burning trash in your yard is potentially dangerous, not just to yourself, but to the community around you as a whole. And though that's logically understood, there probably still are people who are pushing back against that. The fact that it had to be codified into law shows that there are people who ignore logic and reason for self-benefit and self-gain. How do we as a society protect the rights of all citizens if some citizens believe that they should or could be able to ignore laws that are put into place to protect other citizens? The lockdown was not to hurt the economy. It was not to cause job loss. It was not to deny some people life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness. It was designed to protect citizens and the most vulnerable citizens among us. Though every citizen was not in high risk of dying, there were enough citizens at risk that it was necessary to enlist the support of all citizens for that safety to be realized. If life is the number one priority, the whole process of shutting down states, shutting down business was about implementing that aspect of governing, saving lives. There are many instances where I've heard people say, well, people are going to die. So Chris Christie was one. There are some people are going to die. That's just a reality. And so we have to weigh the benefit of the number of people dying versus the number of people harmed by closing down the economic engine that has made America the country that it is. So the difficulty for me on that is that I recognize that people are going to die. It is a natural form of life. Every one of us is going to die. Every single solitary one of us. One of the things that you never get out of alive is life. But that doesn't mean you hasten that or that you make any decisions that impact that lightly. And economic growth or the economic community or the economic engine, it was built one time before and it will be built again. It will survive all of us. It will be here long after I'm gone, long after you're gone, because it's a necessary part of surviving. And to ignore, to minimize, to put the economic engine well ahead of a number of lives, to me, I thought was careless and reckless. Although I do understand that you can't stop everything or shouldn't stop everything in order to protect lives, and you have to weigh the potential for what you're doing to save lives and how many lives it will save and how many lives can you save, how many lives can you realistically save. During the pandemic, there were a lot of people who lost their lives because of being overweight or heart issues or other things not related to the virus. And even in times when we didn't have the virus, there were people dying. So, what effort do we put into making it safe for people and protecting lives? On the highways, every year there was over 50,000 deaths, if I remember correctly. And so we have done things to try to mitigate the deaths on the highway. We haven't gone to as drastic a step as we've taken with the coronavirus, where we've maybe shut down the highways or we've required some draconian laws. And I'm not comparing state shutdowns to draconian, though some people have. I just feel that because of the unknown there was an abundance of caution that was exercised in an attempt to avoid what some people believed was going to be extremely catastrophic. Now, we're not out of the woods yet. And we know that there are people who have been infected once that have been infected more than once. So a person can get reinfected. There are a lot of things that we still don't know about the virus, and it's modifying itself. It's changing. And what those changes are going to be like, we're not sure. This is not something that we've dealt with several versions of the coronavirus, but not like this one. But the issue then becomes, how do we fight the virus if we're going to have people put my liberties before your life? Is is an argument. There are people who are putting their liberties before your life as an argument to saving lives in our society, and that does concern me. But I believe that they have. So we do need to have that discussion. We do need to put forth those ideas, and I do believe we should challenge the idea of locking down the state. But if your argument is only that my right to assemble is greater than the number of lives that can be saved by the shutdown, then the weight of your argument does not seem to rise to the level of ignoring a shutdown. So one other thing that happened in the video clip, and you probably may not have caught it, I did shrink down the video clip. And so, but at the bottom of the video clip, Fox runs a chyron, and one of the items that ran across the chyron talked about Barr, the Attorney General, was chastising Apple for not unlocking people's phones upon request. Now, the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, to our Constitution that they believe in, that Attorney General Barr is supposed to support and protect and defend. The Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by an oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So in other words, this is considered a man's home is his castle, a woman's home is her castle, that the government can't just say we want access to someone's home. They have to issue a warrant, and they have to go through proper channels. They have to meet some type of oversight to violate someone's right to privacy, violate someone's right to unreasonable searches and seizures. Another item that we deal with in trying to protect people's rights and liberties. The Patriot Act was passed 45 days after 9/11, and it was passed in the name of national security. The Patriot Act, and this is from the ACLU website, and if you find a copy of this podcast on YouTube or on wherever you find audio podcasts, because I break the podcast up into video and audio, you'll find those links attached. The Patriot Act was the first of many changes, as I said, it's from the ACLU website. Many changes to surveillance laws that made it easier for the government to spy on ordinary Americans by expanding the authority to monitor phone calls and email communications, collect bank and credit reporting records, and to track the activity of innocent Americans on the internet. While most Americans think it was created to catch terrorists, the Patriot Act actually turns regular citizens into suspects. So I understand people's reticence to give up liberties. There is constantly a balance between your liberties and your safety. But there are checks and balances put in place so that both of those don't have to be mutually exclusive, so that so that your safety can be protected while protecting your rights. And I implore people to not just push the term jumps right on my head, where people push back against authority, to be more conscious of how and when to push back against authority. So I'm going to close with this. The Constitution is a living document. This means that it's constantly changing and being modified as we grow in our society. The role of government has to be flexible enough to incorporate changes that improve our republic, and rigid enough to withstand the onslaught from people who want to carve out individual exceptions. It is always important to recognize the pillars that make our society work. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I look forward to seeing you next week.
That concludes this episode, and thank you for listening. This podcast is designed for live listener interaction. Visit the website, thelionsdenstl.wixsite.com/home for details about how to join the conversation. The video version of Altitude Adjustment is available on YouTube. Search for Lions Den STL. And the audio podcast is available on Stitcher.com, Anchor.fm, the iTunes Store, and the Google Play Music Store, to name a few. Look for Altitude Adjustment where you get your podcast, and consider making a contribution by visiting anchor.fm/altitude-adjustment2. Remember, the internet is powered by your likes, shares, and comments. So please like, share, and comment on this and other episodes, because it matters. As always, be cool, be calm, and above all, be careful. Look out for the other guy, because they may not be looking out for you.